This is the Roland Alpha Juno 2. It's a 6-voice programmable analog polyphonic synth that was manufactured from 1985 to 1987, and it was a truly unique and genuinely innovative synth for its day, with things like the backlit LCD screen and patch names, plus it's got AFTERTOUCH, and in the case of the Juno 2, which is this one, it has a really lovely keyboard as well, which still feels great to me almost 40 years after it was manufactured. But the synths never received the acclaim of previous Junos. So here, I'm going to take a look at why that was and why it's worthy of your attention. It came in a number of flavors. The Alpha Juno 2 was the flagship model. This has a 5-octave keyboard, as I say, with AFTERTOUCH. Yes, AFTERTOUCH in 1985. This was around £799. And then there was the Alpha Juno 1, which had an octave less. It didn't have the AFTERTOUCH or the cartridge, and that was around £575. There was also a rack version called the MKS50, which has got the same sound engine, but you could also add some additional global parameters to patches, things like the overall level and the pitch bend range. There was also a couple of keyboards aimed at the consumer market rather than the professional musician. These were called the HS10 and the HS80, also known as the Synth Plus 10 and the Synth Plus 80 that added speakers. Both had identical sound engines to the others, but they weren't packaged quite as attractively. And to go along with all of these, there was the PG300 programmer, which for an additional £200 gave you access, or easy access, to all the parameters. These can create most of the classic lush analog tones that the Juno series was famous for, plus the range also brought some truly innovative oscillators to the market that could create tones that resembled digital synths, which by the time the Alphas were released had well and truly taken hold of the synth market. It's probably no coincidence that Roland had stopped manufacturing the Alphas the year it released its own world-beaten digital synth, the ubiquitous D50. So rewinding back to 1983, that's 2 years before the release of the Alphas, the DX7 had brought sparkling digital tones within the reach of the masses by use of its innovative FM synthesis system. Previously, those digital tones could only be achieved by the likes of the PPG Wave, a Fairlight or a Synclavier, the price of which was way beyond the reach of most musicians when the choice was either the synth or a house. And companies specialising in analog synths like Moog and Sequential and Oberheim had either gone broke or were just about to. But it never gained the popularity of the previous Junos due to a couple of fatal flaws which seem really obvious to us in retrospect, but not so obvious before the dawn of house and techno, which brought a love of live tweaking and self-oscillating filters. You had to buy the PG300 if you wanted easy access to the parameters, which very few people did, as they cost just as much as the used synth. At least they did when I picked up this when I was a teenager. And the filters are also a bit lackluster. You just can't get those acidic squeals because they don't self-oscillate, which I'll come to in a minute. So firstly, let's just talk about this interface. Previous Junos all had a knob or slider for every function, as did pretty much every other analog synth of its day, and that was until Roland's arch rivals Korg replaced knobs and sliders of the Poly 6 with buttons on their Poly 61. So the general move was definitely away from the knobby interfaces we love today. Look at the JX3P and the JX8P that came after this. No knobs. So the Alpha Junos were released with this lovely futuristic front panel with these membrane buttons, just like the DX7, which by the time the Alpha Junos were released was the best-selling synth ever and had completely turned the synth market on its head. So at the time of release, its interface probably wasn't as derided as it was in the coming years. People didn't tend to tweak sound. You loaded your preset, you played it until the end of the track. Simple. It wasn't until people discovered the joys of live tweaking filters and creating 7-minute long hypnotic club mixes that relied on constantly evolving electronic tones that keyboard players and producers started lusting after those old school knob-ridden interfaces. Now to edit that tone, what we'd have to do is go into parameter select and then we choose the setting. So let's take a look here. Let's change the filter. There we go. Oh no, it's not. There it is. VCF frequency is on 0 at the minute. See there? If we go to the envelopes on 127, so let's turn that down. And let's go back and change the frequency. And what's really annoying about that is that if we go from parameter to parameter, there's no click, there's no way of knowing when you've hit something. So if we wanted to change, I don't know, the release time, we've got to find the release time, which is near the end. T3, L3, L4. You've got to really, really slow down, otherwise you just whiz past it. So let's go to the amount of LFO on the VCF. So VCF, LFO. Oh, I stopped at it pretty quickly that time, but I think you can see my point. Let's go to the type of sawtooth. Where is it? There it is. You've got to really concentrate. And to make things a little bit easier, they've got these tone modification buttons here. So we go to brilliance. That accesses the cutoff frequency. Envelope time. Changes the envelope, obviously. Then we've got mod rate and mod depth, that's the LFO rate, and there's the modulation depth is the amount of modulation, obviously, but it's really limited compared to everything else that everyone started using just after this stopped manufacture. Which obviously is much, much easier to do than faffing around with this alpha dial. So this is a massive part of its downfall, but when you look at it, it's actually quite a really sleek, nice looking synth compared to the 106, which is about this deep, or the Jupiter 6. I know the Jupiter 6 is a bit more complex, but that's literally almost this wide, and it was about as big as the table that you've got in the shot almost. It's massive. So this came along sleek with the nice new DX7 style membrane buttons. Loading presets on this is super simple. We've got 3 groups: preset, memory and cartridge. You need the cartridge installed to use that one, obviously. We've got 64 sounds in each. When you start it, we start on preset 1.1, which is this polysynth sound. Anyone who's ever owned an Alpha Juno will be really familiar with this sound. The very early ones of these didn't have the same sound set as the rest of them. You can download it off the internet. But basically, pretty much all of them have got this. And we start off with that. It's not bad sound. Then we move on to those sort of 1980s weird things that they put on synths, like jazz guitars. You can see over here we've got the pitch bend wheel and push it for modulation. That's sort of typical Roland style. We've got not bad sounds in it. Xylophones, nice strings. And then some lead sounds and bass sounds as well. There's a chorus guitar. Just an absolutely nasty sound, that. Synth bass. Typical sort of synthy sound. Not bad. It's not great for percussion. Never managed to use those. Go to some more high strings. Pretty nice. Don't forget there's no effects on this. A techno string. Never found use for that either, but it is a great techno synth, and we'll come to that in a bit. String organ. Does nice pipe organs actually. A velocity sensitive pipe organ, and some really nice pads in this as well. The lead sounds it's got in it aren't very distinctive. Let's find one. Lead synth 1. It's not very bitey. I think there's some more up here somewhere. Lead synth 2. Another one. So nothing too mind-blowing there. Sax. Electric bass. This is okay. Quite useful at times. Synth bass 2. So I was never very happy with the presets on this. The strings and the pads are nice though. But we go to the memory, these are ones that you can program yourself. So these are ones I've made. But what I'm desperate to do at the minute is to go over to that and tweak it, which of course you can't do on this easily. So once you start programming it yourself, you can start getting really quite nice tones from it, really useful tones. Now we start going into that sort of techno territory. They're all based on this patch, the original What The. Where is it? And that makes great use of this really complex envelope, which we'll come to in a minute. And once you do start programming, it's really easy to get nice tones from it. So that's quite a nice little bass line, but super easy to start getting nice pads from it as well. And again, that's got no effects on it, it's just got the onboard chorus, so you can get really, really nice tones from it. Let's change that into a bit of a stab. Put the chord memory on. And we start to get instant techno. Or if we put a different chord on, let's put a minor 7th. So it really did feel limited when I first got this, but as soon as you start playing around with it and experimenting, which is really, really difficult to do with this interface, it just really massively opens up. So let's look at the sound engine. If you know your Juno synths, all this will be very familiar. We've got an oscillator that gives a sawtooth and a pulse with a sub level and noise. We've also got PWM. We've got a resonant low pass filter and a simple high pass one as well. And we can modulate that with the envelope or the LFO. We've also got key follow, and on this, importantly, that you don't have on most, is aftertouch. We've got a single LFO with a delay on it, and then we've got this really complex envelope. We've got an onboard chorus, we've got a portamento, and we've also got a chord mode as well. Okay, so starting up on the top left with the sawtooth, you'll notice there we've got a lot of different sawtooth shapes, not just a simple standard. Here's the simple standard. Nothing too special about that, but then we move up to this next one. It's got sort of 2 peaks. Sort of like chopped off in the middle, although it looks a bit weird on that oscilloscope because it's a bit out of phase. Basically, it should look something like that. Then we've got this, which is pulse width modulation of a sawtooth. So it's a bit like the world's first ever super saw. And now it's techno side showing, isn't it? It's got no limits, this. I've actually got a no limit style sound in there somewhere. Then we've got one with a few more peaks. And this is where I was talking about having sort of digital sounding things. Loads more harmonics in there than a simple sawtooth. Which means it's easy to make bell tones with it. Very FM-y style sounds, those. And then we've got another one with sort of a few less peaks but spread out. So that's got a few less harmonics than this. So for an analog synth back in 1985, pretty revolutionary. And everything else would just be able to do this. So that was the sawtooth. On the pulse, we've got a square. Looks a bit rounded off, but everything's on full. Then we've got, is that about 25%? And we've got pulse width modulation as well. Doesn't quite go through 0. Let's try that on the sawtooth. So nothing too dramatic on the pulse, but we do have this LFO that's dedicated to PWM. Moving over to the sub then, turn the sub up. Then we've got various shapes on this as well. So that's a little bit like the sawtooth where we've got the 2 peaks. And then a really, really harmonic one there. Don't forget, this is a sub. Then we can have 2 octaves below as a square. And then a 25% 2 octaves below. So quite impressive considering it's a single oscillator. We can't change the volume of the sawtooth or the pulse, they're either on or off, as they are on the other Junos, but we can change the level of the sub. We've got 4 distinct levels, 0, 1, 2 and 3. Just listen to that. 0, 1, 2 and 3. And on noise, and that's white noise. And sticking with the oscillators, we've now got this envelope modulation, and we can have the envelope, the inverted envelope, or we can have the amount adjusted by velocity. So we've got 4 selections there. And with this complex envelope, it means you can do all sorts of mad stuff. So let's just turn that up. Let's put a sawtooth on. Let's do something mad with the envelope. And you can hear in there the birth of Mentasm by Joey Beltram, can't you? Turn that into a more hoovery sound. Add a little bit of glide. Not quite getting there yet. Let's put the VCA onto gate so we're not waiting for it to come in. Maybe add a bit of PWM on the pulse as well. Then add some sub. Add a bit of high pass so it doesn't get too muddy. And now maybe change the sub. So all sorts of goodness you can get from that. So you put that on a negative envelope. Pretty demonic, that, isn't it? Let's put the chorus on. Considering all the presets, that were just really a bit lame, in my opinion. That's dirty, isn't it? So there's tons of stuff. I was going to say in a simple looking DCO, but when you actually look at that and you compare it to something like the Juno 106, it does look like it's a bit more complex, doesn't it? But being able to modulate the pitch with the envelope and having the sort of super saw on this is really fantastic. But you've got to remember that just like the Juno 6, the 60 and the 106, these are DCOs, which are digitally controlled analog oscillators. They're much more stable than their fully analog counterparts, the much less stable VCO or voltage controlled oscillators. But without going into too much of the rabbit hole of VCO versus DCO, VCOs are often considered to sound warmer than DCOs because of their inherent instabilities, but DCOs are much more reliable, especially on stage when temperatures can vary massively, causing VCOs to constantly need retuning. And I'm also saying it because there are still misconceptions about DCOs, about them being digital oscillators. And I do get comments with people being confused. So I think it's just worth stressing that here. They're not digital. You can't get those nasty digital artifacts, but they're not VCOs that are a bit more drifty and maybe a bit warm sounding. But it's still analog. Okay, it's time to move over then to its second Achilles heel, its second major flaw, and that's the VCF. Let's just get a standard single sawtooth back up again. Okay, we start off there, and it's not the brightest of filters. And if you're interested in how it does compare with the Juno 106, I have got a video called Battle of the Junos or something that I did a few years ago where I played the two of them next to each other. But let's just drop the cutoff. No great shakes, is there? It is a 24 dB filter. Like the 106. And when we increase the resonance, we can't hear anything. It's not self-oscillating, is it? It almost gets there at times, but not really. So it almost gets squelchy, but it doesn't actually get there, which is part of its downfall, I think. That's just the filter, really, I think we're hearing there. Lovely deep bass rumble in the studio. That is just the filter. It just doesn't sing to you. It doesn't pop those harmonics out, does it? Let's have a look at the sort of frequency analysis on that. Normally that peak will be going way over the fundamental. So it's got famous tones in it. One's called Sin Rise. Here it is. but that's as resonant as it's going to go. So a little bit, but yeah, we put some envelope on that. Let's try and do something a little bit more dancey, more contemporary, more modern than 1985. Just trying to get my head around the envelopes again. It's difficult. So you can't quite get your acid lines from it. I'm not sure why they did that, because they do have a perfectly good working 24 dB nicely resonant filter in the 106. I think self-oscillation was seen as a little bit of a flaw, and it is much better and much smoother to get rid of it, which is a sort of a big mistake, but there you go. So let's try the high pass. On the 106 on 0 you get a little low frequency bump. I don't think you get that on this. Let's just put everything back. It's sort of simple. No, just a simple high pass filter. But it is a nice sounding synth, isn't it? And those tones I played earlier, this Kawaii it's called on this. That's a really simple tone I get from this really old Kawaii 100F. A really powerful big tone that is in a club. Really punchy, and nothing else could emulate it except for this. Which is why I've programmed it in a few times. Okay, well I think we've finished with the filter. We've mentioned the envelope earlier, but I'll just go into it in a little bit more detail now and show exactly how this thing works. And it might be easiest to do this using the envelope on the DCO, actually listening to the pitch. So we have a time 1 and a level 1, time 2 and a level 2, a time 3 and a level 3, and a time 4. So it's a attack, sustain, decay, sustain, decay, sustain, release. Attack, sustain, decay, sustain, attack, sustain. Attack, sustain, decay, sustain, decay, sustain, release. There we go. So it builds to the first level. Then it's dropping to the second level over this time. And once it hits that level, it starts on T3 and works its way up to T3 in this case, or down now. So going up to level 1, down to level 2, down to level 3. Let's go up to level 1, down to level 2, and then back up to level 3. And then let's have some release on it as well. So a truly strange envelope. So to just use it as a simple ADSR, stick all them on full and an ADSR. can also follow that with the keyboard. So we should be getting shorter times the higher up we go. So as well as being complex, the envelopes are really long as well. I've put the VCA onto gate here, so it's going to go up to level 1, and then down over T2 to level 2 at the bottom, then back up again to level 3, and we're going to be modulating the pitch with it. And I'm not going to wait to the end because it just takes ages. In fact, I'm going to stop it there. I did play with it before, but it's just incredibly boring to watch. We saw the chord mode earlier. Let's just have another little play with it. So really easy to use. Chord memory, write the chord. So let's do done. Play it. So really simple to get really big, nice, thick, dancey, techno-y tunes from this. You can also write it as a single note. And now we've got a mono synth. See why this massively opens up what you can do with it, can't you? I can't believe how easy it is to use when you've got a hardware controller. I can't believe I didn't buy one 30 years ago. What an idiot. Okay, let's look at the LFO, shall we? So it's not super quick. I forgot what the actual specs are on it, but let's try using it on the oscillator. We're not quite getting up to those FM style tones, are we? Let's try it with one of these nice harmonic oscillators, shall we? So it does bring some additional tones, actually. That's not something I've explored before. Again, no effects. We've also got a delay on the LFO. Which is an awful long delay, actually, isn't it? Do you know, I can't be bothered waiting. And I was playing with the chorus there, so this is different to the Juno 106 chorus. Let's bring it all down again. Chorus on. We've got a variable chorus rate. And although that's not as famous as the 106 chorus, I really like it. We've got aftertouch control of the filter, the oscillator and the VCA. So loads of control, except this keyboard itself has never worked. The aftertouch has never worked on this synth. And I didn't realise it had it or what aftertouch was when I bought it as a teenager. So I was ripped off basically, but I don't think it's working on many, to be honest. But if you use another keyboard, it works absolutely fine. And I think that brings me to the end of the synth engine section of this. And what it's done is it really showed me how useful it is to have a controller and how you can really get the best from it without using the alpha dial. But let's do a little test, shall we? Let's turn this into a bit of PWM with the LFO modulating the VCF and a bit of chorus. Just get everything back to 0. Okay, I'm going to do that on the Juno 2. So parameter select, need to go to pulse. And you'll notice it just says pulse 3 there, so you've got to go and check which pulse 3 is, and that is PWM. Parameter sawtooth, let's put that on PWM as well, shall we? So I don't know how long that took me, but let's do exactly the same thing on the controller. So I'll reset it to the same values. Okay, on your marks, get set, go. About the same, and it took me a quarter of the time, a tenth of the time, a 5% of the time, I don't know. So a massive recommendation for this would be to get a software controller. There's loads of free ones and there's really cheap ones for the iPad, and the CTRLR controller panels that you can get for the Mac, I think for the PC as well, and they're completely free, but well worth doing that if you want to dig into this synth. It uses system exclusives, so you can't use every standard MIDI controller. So yeah, if you get a Juno 2 or a Juno 1 or an MKS50, get yourself some controller software or hardware as well. So I hope that was of some use to somebody somewhere. If it was, please think about subscribing, ring that bell, and maybe join me on my Patreon page. Everything helps the channel. I've enjoyed doing this. So I'll see you next time.